So when I was utterly without funds, when I had absolutely no money, I actually had to eat very little. I had to eat a lot of brown rice and other staples that were very, very inexpensive. Then I noticed that as my financial situation improved, I started to eat a lot. And then I started to become worried because I thought, well, look, at this rate, by the time I'm making $100,000 a year, I'll be eating 50,000 calories a day. But of course, that logic is spurious. Now, the question is, why is it spurious? Well, here's what's going on. Okay, so at the absolute lowest level of poverty, one really does not have enough to eat. Okay, but that's not the situation for people in the Western world, even for the poorest people in the Western world, because in this country, in the Western world, there is food available at soup kitchens, and it's good food, and there's a lot of it. Okay, but people who are quote unquote poor in this country and in other parts of the Western world, what actually happens is you'll notice that they tend to be incredibly obese. And then as you consider people who are higher and higher up in the socioeconomic and sociocultural ladder, they are more and more likely to be trim and in good shape. So what is going on? Well, what is going on is that when people are poor, they are in a constant state of desperation. They are in a constant state of panic. So they eat to create a sense of security. They eat to create insulation. Of course, there's actual physical insulation being created because they're making themselves fat. And that is not just a metaphor for what is going on. It's actually part of what's going on. But there's obviously some other form of insulation that is more important that is being created, a neurotic kind of insulation. And also, when you are constantly in a state of poverty, your attitude towards life is defensive. It is not proactive, it is reactive. So your agency has been damaged. You're simply reacting to circumstances, and you have a kind of, your attitude is, I'll take what I can get when I can get it. I won't think about tomorrow. I'll think about the next 5 minutes, because that's all that you really believe yourself to have. And if that's all you really believe yourself to have, then you quickly degenerate into a condition of degeneracy, of basically of seeking immediate gratification, and therefore not of really exercising your agency in any distinctively human or therefore in any distinctively meaningful way. And of course, as your condition, your financial condition improves, you're able to make plans and your agency is restored, and you're actually able to act and not just react. And as a result, you're not simply seeking immediate gratification like a dog that will eat whatever is placed before it, no matter how much it's eaten before. You are able to counterbalance the prospect of immediate pleasures with the prospect of other pleasures or other more important forms of gratification down the line. And this also explains why it is that even though drug use is found in large degrees in all economic strata, nonetheless, you do find that people who are very, very poor actually tend to be the ones who, in both relative and absolute terms, use the most drugs. Okay, now what do I mean by relative and absolute terms? Well, consider some dirt poor, literally dirt poor, truly dirt poor crack addict. What that person spends on drugs is, first of all, enormous relative to his income. It is 100% of his income, essentially. And what that person spends in absolute amounts, in other words, just the number of dollars that he spends, is still very high, even when you compare what he spends on drugs to what a millionaire living in a penthouse in Manhattan spends on his heroin addiction. So even though drug use is far more evenly distributed among the various social and intellectual and educational and cultural classes than is morbid obesity, even though wealthy people are 9 times out of 10 trim and in good shape, whereas poor people in the Western world are 7 times out of 10 fat and obese and morbidly so. Nonetheless, and even though despite that fact, you nonetheless find much more uniformity in respect of drug use among the various classes than you do in respect of eating, nonetheless, you do find that poor people will use drugs vastly in excess of what they can afford, and vastly in excess, just in absolute terms, not just relative to what they can afford, but just in absolute terms, vastly in excess of what their wealthy drug-using counterparts do. I mean, an upper-class junkie who has virtually unlimited funds, who is still going to not use more, he's probably likely to use less than a dirt poor junkie whose funds are totally limited. In any case, an upper class cocaine addict is not likely to outpace, in terms of the actual raw amount of cocaine used, he's not likely to outpace his dirt poor counterpart. So what is the explanation? The explanation is the one given earlier, that in the one case, it is driven by sheer panic. Okay, the dirt poor crack addict or heroin addict, in his case, there are two factors going on. There are two determinants. Okay, on the one hand, there's simply the fact that it feels good and he's a degenerate tautologically. Okay, so he does what he enjoys, and that's that. Okay, but there's also another factor, which is panic, which is actual fear. Now, in the case of the upper class user, only one of those factors is present. There's the degeneracy factor, okay, but there is not the imminent prospect of destitution, of absolute dread. So, and this explains the previously given numbers. So again, the morbid obesity, the disproportionate amount of obesity and of drug use found among those who are least in a position to afford them, in every sense of the word afford, has to do with the fact that when you are poor, you are A, in a state of constant panic, and you are therefore B, living life defensively, not proactively, and consequently C, your agency has deteriorated or been reconfigured into some kind of almost subhuman form as a result. And one incidental point, you know that mafiosos, the Italian-American mafiosos, used to eat huge amounts. A lot of that had to do with the fact that they knew that they were going to go to jail, so they had this, let's live it up now because we don't know what the future will bring attitude. That is what is going on there.